these are the batteries I got installed. Each of these is about 10 kilowatt hours. So at 40p of electricity, that's £4 worth of electricity you can store in one of these. And
what's the house usually use in a day or a week? Like,
you use about £2 a day.
So what's that? 5 kilowatt hours.
5 fours would be £2, yeah. So I use about 50, and then gas as well. So that's enough to store 60.
It's going to be, if you think of a 3-bar fire, if you have that one for 1 hour a day, that's 3 kilowatt hours.
But you might have gas heating and depends what you're using, electric oven, gas heating,
gas oven.
and the gas oven. So we've got an electric induction hob, 2 electric ovens. There's electric underfloor heating that I sometimes use. There's a server. It's my son who plays lots of games, and then his graphics card is pumping out heat. The majority tends to be background stuff of servers and routers and IT stuff in my house. But yeah, it tends to be about 40, 50 kilowatt hours. 60 kilowatt hours of storage. So I found out recently that's about a day and a half of me. Those batteries are all wired up to these things. So there's the negative terminals and positive terminals that join all together. In there's actually lightning rods because they needed stuff that could take enough current. Normally you have one of these if you're doing a battery install, but there's so much current with 6 of them. So that there you go, negative terminals and positive terminals. So you open that and there's a lightning rod, a hunk of copper, and all of these wires from the batteries come up. So the positives are all in one place and the negatives are all in one place. And all the cables have to be the same length to there, because if they're short, then that battery will send power more than the other one. And if they're long, it won't as much. So they all have to be the same. So all of them go there, and then they go to these breakers. So these are DC breakers. So it's 48 volts, the batteries. Comes up there, 48 volts goes to the breakers, and then it comes back down here and up to the inverters. So 48 volts goes in here and here. There are 3 inverters. So each of these does 5 kilowatts. With your bar fire, you could have 5 3-kilowatt fires on in the house, and that would be it. These supply my house all the time. Mains from here, these wires here are mains. These are the DC ones. So the mains wires are on the left of each of these. They come to these switches. So there's inverter 1, 2, and 3. And then that goes to the mains here. And then there's one in and one out. So they take it in for charging the batteries, and then the out goes to supply the house. Any questions about that?
So is your house always running off the batteries?
Effectively, it's always running through these inverters.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that is unusual. A normal inverter is an on-grid inverter, so you're connected to the grid, and the grid is supplying you, and the inverter decides whether or not to help it. That's how a normal inverter works, and it's called an on-grid inverter. These are off-grid inverters, and that means the power that's supplied to the house comes from these regardless, and all of it comes from them. And it means at night, this will pull power from the grid and pump it into the batteries, and it's App Store Connect that's controlling all of that. So it's saying, start pulling from the grid, start charging the batteries, charge them this quickly, and then flick. When it charges, it pulls from the grid the power for the house. So rather than charge and discharge at the same time, it pulls from the grid. The voltage of the house changes. So when these are on, it's 220 volts, and it's like flat, 220 volts. Mains will go between 220 and like 250, 260, and it varies quite a lot. So you see it on the voltage in the house. When it clicks, it'll jump from 220 to 240, and then when it clicks, it'll jump back to 220 when it's coming from the batteries effectively.
You see that in your lights? No, the LEDs.
LED. You do. You see a flick. You do see a flick. Because these are off-grid inverters, and they're electronic as opposed to large transformers.
Yeah.
So large transformers have like a momentum, an electric momentum. These don't. And it's all really fast electronics, which makes them a lot cheaper, but it means they have to react super fast to any load to go put loads of power in. But they seem to do it. I've been amazed. I've got like a compressor, the fridge, things that are like a motor tend to be a complete short circuit as far as the mains is concerned. And these seem to handle it. There will be a dip of the lights at the moment, but it's never taken anything out.
So what's the normal if your setup is unusual? Because for me it strikes me as the setup that you have is what you would maybe expect things to be like, in that the intention behind this would be to charge them up when electricity is cheap,
Yeah.
use the electricity from the batteries when it's more expensive.
Yeah.
So in a normal setup, like what would the use case for this be?
Yeah, so like
More just like a continuously charge the battery up once it drops to a certain level, and then use the battery as opposed to the mains until it drops back down below a certain level again, or
so there are a
or
bunch of different use cases. I would say normal for the guys fitting it is, I want to put a few solar panels on my roof. There's only so much power you can feed back to the grid. You may want to keep it rather than feed it back to the grid and then take it back again, because actually you lose money that way. So they would tend to use the battery to store the solar and make the most use of it themselves. That's what is what I would say a normal install in the UK of an inverter and a battery. A relatively small battery, a whole heap of solar. You'll use most of it, but during the day when you're at work, it might charge up the battery, and then you come home, you cook your tea and stuff, and it'll be coming off of that. So that'd be a normal one. The other normal use of these sorts of inverters, because actually using them to, I think it's called demand shifting, what I'm doing, using them to do that, they're not really designed for it. Effectively, we're making them do it with App Store Connect, but they are made to charge the batteries up to a level and then act like a UPS. So that in places in the likes of Africa, you've got mains that's really unreliable. You throw a ton of batteries in, they charge them up, and then they're ready for the mains to trip. And then they'll just leap in as soon as the mains tripped and supply power then. So that's another sort of main use case for the off-grid inverters.
So I guess Scottish Water at Perth is your first scenario. They have solar and battery.
Yeah, and that's also grid connected. So yeah, so that's also in common.
What's the deal with the frequency?
The grid frequency is 50. This will be 50. Frequency, you can see it. It's a tag.
I thought electric clocks used the grid frequency, and the grid would know if it had been slow and would speed it up.
Yeah, doesn't the grid average 50 rather than is always 50? If that's...
Correct. So the main electric grid is slightly different to this. This is single phase, so there's only one phase of electric. The main electric grid is three phase, so you've got three separate phases that add up to all the power. They keep it around 50, and they do a lot of control around keeping it 50. It tends to, with the main grid, because it's spinning stuff mostly, so you've got like hydroelectric power, nuclear power, all of these things are effectively motors or alternators generating power that are generating at three phase. And so when you pull too much power, they slow down. And when they slow down, the frequency drops. So you see that on the grid because it's a physical connection between the frequency and the power. And they do go to great lengths to make it exactly 50. And you're right, they balance out because older clocks do use that for timing. Yeah, so that is
because this is electronic, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, because it's electronic, it doesn't change the frequency when you increase the load. It will just, well,
and because you're going through the inverter, the grid frequency doesn't matter.
Yes, except in the evening when it's charging, and it will actually bypass the batteries and stuff and connect the house to the grid. But it's like electronically connected. It's not like a switch. The house will be the same frequency and in phase with the grid for the time that it's charging, and then when it's finished charging, it will load, and then it will be controlling that itself.
You probably don't have an average 50.
Probably slightly off, yeah.
Because half the time it is 50.
And in the evening, you'd expect that the frequency might be slightly higher because there would be less load in the evening. And there tends to be less load in the evening, that's cheaper. Feel free to leap in questions about this as we go into other stuff.
Did you decide on this configuration?
Honest answer, no. It was a mistake. I didn't know I was buying off-grid inverters, and I didn't really understand the difference between an off-grid and an on-grid inverter. In fact, this was sold as a hybrid inverter, which is supposed to mean both. And it does, but in a weird way. So you get hybrid inverters that can charge and discharge into the grid, and then this is a hybrid inverter which cannot discharge into the grid. So I can't use the batteries and then put the power into the grid.
Right, you can't sell
is
that.
the difference. And I didn't realize that until I got them. Then I was like, this is not obvious. I was chatting to the person that sold me them. They were like, no, it doesn't do that. I was like, okay. So yeah, that was a bit of a surprise. Some of my learning around what these actually are. Yeah,
buy it at night and sell it in the day.
I can't. Yeah, I can only not buy at times.
Totally.
Yeah, which is the demand shift. So I thought I'd show you, this is Octopus that my electricity is through. So there's how much electricity and gas I'm using. And you can see how much electric on what days. The big bars tend to be charging the car. So it takes quite a whack charging the car. And if I look at day, so as far as the grid and as far as Octopus is concerned, this is what my load looks like. So it's from 11:30 at night through to 5:30 in the morning, right? And then it's just nothing. They were saying that was when it was the most power that was taken out. If I go back one, I'll show you. Yeah, this is what my electricity cost is. So during the day, it's 40.4 pence.
4 times the difference.
And at night, it's 10. Or sorry, at night it's 10 pence. So it's a quarter of the price to charge up the batteries and then discharge them than it is to just pull power from the grid. This wasn't the reason I installed them. I looked at that. When I was buying them, it was 5 pence a night, and it was 25 pence during the day. And I did all these calcs to work out I could save £2,600 a year, and it would take me almost 10 years to make the money back. The batteries have a lifetime of about 15 years. Right. The inverters, I'm not sure how long before I'd have to replace them. They probably won't last 15 years. They're about 700 quid for the inverters. The battery is about £2,000 each. So the battery's total was 10 grand. Then I had to pay that when I imported it. I probably could have got this on some sort of a grant, but they weren't registered as a product because I got them direct from a factory. All the inverters were 1,700, and then the install was a bit of a surprise at 10 grand. And a lot of that was for copper. So those DC cables between the batteries and the inverters, they were expensive and needed to be. There's a lot of current going through them. So that was what it looked like in 2021. So I was looking at, I'd save £2,500 a year, and it would take about 9 or 10 years, and it would break even. But I was looking at this as I want to have power in winter if there's 3 hours of an outage, and that was 2 years ago.
Yeah.
That was worried about that. Today, these prices have changed, and my usage has changed slightly. So today it's 10p at night and 40p during the day. I'm using about 50 kilowatt hours a day. So that means right now I'm saving about £4,500 a year. That means my time to payback is about 5 years. So it's just halved in a way that I would never have been able to tell before when I was buying it. Yeah. Any questions about that? So you did get a quick look at the displays we were looking at. Here's here. So there's the voltage of the house. It's 220. There's the voltage of the grid just now. And of course, nothing's coming from it. This will, at different times of the day, do different things. So we'll get power coming in from the grid. We'll get power going out or going into the batteries. So right now it's coming out of the batteries. It's quite interesting watching these two numbers because in theory they should be exactly the same, and that's it. So this is the power from the batteries calculated by using the voltage and the current coming from the batteries. And this is the power to the house calculated using the measurement inside the inverters. So in theory these should be the same. In practice these are quite different. And surprisingly so. So that right now, while Steve says it, it looks almost exactly the same. That's what happens when you say it.
It wasn't
but
before.
But it will vary, and they'll vary to quite a lot. And it tends to be a step difference of about 300 watts, which is 0.3 on that. I've not really got to the bottom of it. I think some of it might be to do with phase and the difference between what you call kilovolt amps, which is when you multiply the voltage and the current, and watts, which is when you multiply the voltage and the current, and the difference being time, and when's the current and when's the voltage and which one's the peak, and are they at the same time or are they at different times. So I think that might be the reason for some of the difference. I'm not able to answer that absolutely just now.
Squares and stuff in there.
Yes, but if you do RMS of the voltage and RMS of the current and you multiply the two, that's different because what you need to do is multiply every time sample to get the same amount of actual power. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And there's 2 different powers as well, isn't there?
Actual,
real and apparent.
Yeah, and that is the reason. So apparent and real, I can't remember which one's which.
Yeah.
One of them is taking every time sample and the other one is effectively assuming they're in phase.
Do these add up over time if you like average them or whatever?
Integrated them.
I think the answer is no. When you integrate them, there is a significant difference between the two, and it's different in a weird way like this. Look at that, 1.4, 1.1. That's about what you normally see is 0.3 of a kilowatt more coming out of the inverters.
You should use that extra 0.3 to recharge the batteries and then you'll get it again.
Yeah, I think I think a lot of physicists really hate looking at these numbers, right? Because the idea that you can use batteries and get 300 watts more than you get out of them makes people worry about the universe.
Clearly, that's not.
So I think
I mean,
this number is real.
I have a feeling it's just sensor inaccuracy.
It might be, but it's quite a lot. I mean, these are 5 kilowatt inverters, so it's not out with normal range. And they do have metering. I think that the metering is correct. I do think that this is just a difference between real and a pan because it's not obvious which one it is. And this is calculating the number of hours left if we carry on with the rate we're currently using them with that percentage of battery. So that's what that's doing. So say now it lasts 34 hours. When it's charging, it pops up here and says how many hours it's going to be at charge. All this is PNID with the numbers underneath. And I'll go down the way. So I'll start with PNID, then I'll go back into App Store Connect, and then I'll show you the things that are supplying it with stuff.
So the graph on the left is power coming from the grid.
Yeah.
The graph on the right
is power being taken by the house, which is not very much right now. So that's up to 20 kilowatts.
Why is there not other bars there?
Because it's low, not a lot of power.
It's so low we can't see it.
So low, it's not really doing anything. If 2 ovens came on, this would come up to here.
Server running.
And the server running's about that. I'll show you a trend. So I quite like the trends. So this is the overall charge of all of the batteries for the last week. The thing that's doing all the controlling stuff was a laptop up until this point. It became a VM during this point, and that VM had the wrong time in it, so it didn't charge until too late. And it charged as quickly as it could, and then it went, oh, I'll just leave you like that, Steve. This went to, took 2 of the batteries to 0. The inverters did what they should and went, well, these batteries are a bit low. I'm just going to start taking stuff from the grid, even though it's not the right time. This is the first time this had happened, was just in the last sort of 5 days. So the power in the house was okay. So Steve went to the garage and looked at the batteries because this had happened and went, oh, some of them are on 0%. It's not good to hold them at 0%. I want to charge them up a bit. When the inverters clicked over at mains, they then charge at the rate that App Store Connect was telling them to charge at, and it had told them to charge at about 300 watts, which is next to nothing. And I wanted it to charge the ones that were on 0%. Because they were on 0, they were taking almost nothing, and it was all going into the other batteries. If I'd left it, it would all have been fine, and it would have charged in the evening, and it would have charged faster, and they'd all balanced out. But I wanted to make sure it charged those quickly to keep the life of them up. So I manually DC disconnected the batteries that had power, and found that when that happens, the inverters switch off and take out the power, and then Lisa Sky's gone, and I'm not very popular. So that was all because the time was wrong. On the VM, so I had to get that right. And then when it was right, it went, poof, charged up the next time, so it got up to about the right amount. And then you've got the discharge during the day, charging up, discharge during the day. You can see wee kinks, and that'll be evident when I show you how it charges, because it doesn't go straight line. On the batteries, there's things like the voltage of every cell. There are 16 cells in each of the 6 batteries. When I showed that to the people that manufactured the batteries, they about hit the floor because they'd never seen anyone record all of the cell voltages from one battery, let alone 6 of them. And then we've got the state of health, the state of charge, the remaining capacity, how much it's supposed to have, the ambient temperature inside it. So there's a whole ton.
These are all sensors that were available within the batteries.
Yes.
Nobody had been historizing them.
Correct. In fact, when they supplied them to me and I said, can you give me the details of the protocol these batteries speak? The guy who had replied to me on, it was Alibaba, got in touch, and it turned out he's the technical director of the company. When the request came to buy them, it got flagged because this was what they considered to be not a domestic purchase because of how many there were. And so it was like one of the directors of the company that replied to me. And he turned out to be a director of the biggest battery supplier in the UK. So, and he was like, what are you doing? And he's a really interesting guy. He's very technical, and he understood everything I was asking and knew why I was asking it. So it was really good fun. A guy called Milson Zeng. So yeah, we've got all those cell voltages, temperatures. So we've got 4 temperatures around the battery, amount of current, number of times it's cycled. Actually, that might be quite interesting. It should be about the same with all the batteries. But that'll be a relatively straight line. So that's about 124 times they've been charged and discharged. So you can also do that times what the capacity is and work out how many kilowatt hours has come out of them. that's just the data from the batteries.
The
If you normalised it.
Yeah, every day it'll go up by 1.
Yeah.
Go and normalise it, and we'll see it step up in tune with the
Yeah.
sawtooth. It's the middle of every sawtooth,
So 124.5,
but it's not.
125,
Well, in general.
124. So it's,
Though it's stopped counting at the right-hand side there. There's at least 2 cycles that aren't added on.
125. It's probably because
They're
these
not
aren't
big
full
enough.
cycles. So
Yeah,
it is
it's not
counting
big enough cycle.
full cycles. It'll add them up. So this is like total ampere hours divided
Yeah.
by the ampere hour of the battery.
Yeah.
And it does have, I think, total ampere hours in there. So this is effectively divided 2, make it an integer. So yeah, you can see that right now, it's really only discharging to about 49%.
How long is traffic going to go down to? Like 25.
I'm okay with 0, but not for long. You ideally want to keep them between 20 and 80. They don't know what their charge state is. I was in a chat with that guy just yesterday, the Milton Singh guy, about, I think the way that you figure out the charge state is wrong, and because it only really resets on 100 or 0. And I was like, you should do it like a few percent from 100 and a few percent from 0. And here's how you could do that. And he's like, oh yeah. And then another one I was saying is, how do you balance the cells? Can you bring it up to full charge? It just stops when one of them is fully charged. So I was like, I'd like it to continue and to overcharge one of them because it just turns into heat, but then to allow the other ones to come up to the same level.
You know, how much heat that
Yeah, okay. You can actually see that. Let's do a longer trend and add that temperature. A couple of them. And we'll go away from normalized. Absolute.
Something bad happened there, obviously.
That's comms. So I switched to wireless about here. It would drop out whilst it was clearing one of the batteries and not get the details of all the batteries and then add up.
that's it. Metric fields interfering
Yeah. So it wasn't really the state of charge going like that. And then that's when I noticed and fixed it. So now it's resilient to that happening and it'll carry on. So it is still dropping out, but it's not affecting the data. So there's it charging at 99.5. Let's go back a bit further. You see there's a cycle time thing going up and up and up. Now that's discharge and then charging. You can see it's charged about, if I click there, I'll get the time aligned. So the batteries are going from 11 degrees to 23 degrees, 24 degrees. You do get a bit of a spike though. So let's go for one of the cell temperatures with the graph. And that's a bigger one because it starts from lower, so it gets all the heat from all of the charging. A couple of metric tons of metal going up by 10 degrees Celsius. So it's quite a bit of heat. They don't seem to radiate much, so you touch them and they're not warm. And there's no fans on the batteries. The inverters have fans, but the batteries don't. I'm looking for something where it showed a kink. Not seeing it. But it did. I remember once it hit 100% and it rose by 5 degrees in about a minute. So that's sort of, but it depends how fast you're charging it at the point it hits 100 because it's that waste. That it has to waste because it's not charging anymore as heat. So this is the machine that's connected to it, and it's actually got a web page up, which is for one of, that's like a serial thing on this end. So you screw wires into that connects in, it's got power on it, and then this is a Wi-Fi. This is 232, but you get 485 ones, and there's 2 of these next to the batteries and next to 100 and next to the inverter. So the inverter speaks Modbus over RS485, and the batteries speak their own language over 485. Both of them happen to be 9K6. This is the web page for that device. So it's connected to my Wi-Fi at home, and then this is the web page for that. This is the one that's connected to the inverters, and you can see it's 9K6. This gap time is the same gap time we have in App Store Connect, and it caused the same problem we saw in that this needed to be increased. Otherwise, it crashes in inverters. If you request 2 things too quickly, the Modbus server will just say, "I'm not talking anymore."
I say that's higher than the gap time we configured. Did we not have 100 milliseconds?
Was it? Well, I had this at 6, and it still happened, so I increased it.
So what are you measuring? So this is communication.
Yeah.
And what are you plugging into here?
Oh.
What's it recording?
All those sensors.
Yes.
Oh, right. So see, this is how you're getting the data out of the batteries.
Correct. So there's
Right.
2 of those as power. So I've got a USB connector going to 2 wires that go in there.
Yeah.
And the other 2 wires are the serial cable
Out of
for the
batteries.
inverters and the batteries.
Right.
And this is all the serial settings for that. So the inverter one, this thing knows about Modbus. So you say it's Modbus, and it's very like some of the industrial stuff in that you can have multiple Modbus clients all talking to this, and then it will talk over serial, and it all works. It's pretty cool. Not really expensive, these things. There's one of these for the inverter, and there's one for the batteries. And as far as data core is concerned, there's a serial port, and there's a TCP/IP Modbus. If I go to data sources, we've got one for the batteries, and this is a data source that's not prod yet, but that is a command pipe. So you can run a command on the command line, and it will stream a CSV at you, and then you just record those tag values and as a new tag. When you see these, they are something that's come out of a command. It's just streaming. More normal, this is the Modbus driver. So if I take a look at that, and that's on the alpha, but it's connected to 192.168.250.138, which is this, on that port, and it's just doing Modbus with that. So if we browse some of the tags, and this is the inverters. So this is the manual for the inverters that shows what addresses it's got on Modbus. This is showing examples of how to create Modbus. But at the end, here's a table of all the variables. So you'll start to get an idea quickly of how many of these are. The first ones are all kind of high-level ones. So there's around 80, 90 of them. And then there's input registers, which are more the things that you read. And you can see that starting at 0. There are a couple of skips, but there's well over 200. That's probably another 20, so 220 or so per inverter. So there's 3 of them. There's like 1,700 tags just for those batteries in my garage. All of these are put into this CSV, which says that's the name, that's the address.
This is your Modbus maps.
And this is the Modbus mappings. Yeah. So for data core, it's going to read this and go, I've got 3 inverters, and here are all the tags. You see some of them, I don't know what they are. A lot of these I had to change from what the manual said to what they actually were, because it was obvious they were wrong.
How did you mention a little bit where they were? It's just a number.
AC voltage, most of them tend to be times 10, times 100, times 1,000, so you could get a number that made sense. And then you can switch stuff on and off, and you can charge batteries up and down, and then it's just deduction.
Right.
There are these variables that should exist, and they should be in roughly this order. So that one works, that one works. Those ones must be the ones in the middle. That sort of stuff.
So you fed this back to your man in China?
Well, this is the inverters, so this is
Okay.
a totally different company. And so
Right.
the man in China that does the batteries is very open and interesting. The company that does the inverters, Growatt, is very closed. They are, don't you dare connect our inverters to anything else, is the way that they deal with stuff. In fact, you must buy the batteries from us, and you must buy everything from us. That's how Growatt play. And Growatt has some very good inverters that are, like, being able to do all of that electronically is pretty special. So they are using that on the market to get people to buy their stuff. Make sense?
Yeah.
Yep.
So they go like what they're doing.
I think they'd hate what I'm doing. Yeah. I think they would. They'd much prefer I bought it all Growatt. But that would have meant the payback would have been a lot longer.
A violation of their license terms.
Luckily, it's a piece of hardware, so I don't think there's license terms. And it gets funny because, what's the Modbus connector for?
Telling me I'm going to break it by using the Modbus connector.
This is the software that came with the batteries and the manual. So it was all in Chinese and Mandarin. This was their software for looking at it. So this is the only way they'd ever seen the data from the batteries themselves that showed voltages and temperatures of the cells and stuff. So when they saw like what I was doing, they were like, "What the hell is this?" And I did say to them, if there's clients that are looking for being able to do this, then we've got something that does. The protocol for the batteries is really weird, and it took them a long time to be able to send me it. And it turns out there is a battery manufacturer that's not the one that made these, and they must make the BMSs because it speaks a protocol that's very similar to theirs but different. So there was nothing online that could talk to them at all, but there was something that talked a similar language. It was in Python. So I grabbed the Python for that, modified it, changed all of this stuff in terms of what variables are where. And this is a Python script. So what I'll do is I'll pause data core. So I'm looking for Python. This is Python still running. This is the thing that makes that network device into a serial port. So it's a virtual serial port. As far as the computer is concerned, it's talking to a serial port, even though it's something on the network. This is what that Python script is doing. So you can see it's reading, going, this time, this tag name, this value. And it just keeps going and going and going and going. And then data core runs that, listens to it, and creates tags for everything it sees, and then stores the values. Well, actually sends them on to IPS, and IPS stores them. So that's where all the data for the batteries is coming from, is through that, which is very different to the way that inverter data is coming, because it's more like standard industrial stuff. It's just going, use a Modbus driver, talk to it, job done. So this is good for home stuff, but not so good for industrial stuff, I would say. And then we can start this up again.
So I would have thought this would be kind of, you'd be looking at some an MQTT broker. The guy's going straight to MQTT, and
You can do that if you're talking Modbus.
but it would still have to be Modbus before you even got to. Yeah. This,
Yeah, because ultimately, if the batteries are just spitting out
Yeah.
a CSV stream, you
So
need
that,
to take
yeah.
that and put it somewhere. So you could have something that takes that and sticks it into MQTT,
yeah.
I'll show you.
but that's still the
This is the closest protocol
Right.
is to what the batteries do, because the CSV is not what the batteries do. So this is what that was based off, is this Python script. Even the Pylon Tech, which is the proper protocol, which this isn't. So it's all binary, random commands. Yeah, so here's like a frame. So you've got all of this stuff for one type of command, but you get the idea. Putting this into MQTT, there's a lot of work to do before you're going to manage to do it.
And of course, that's great. Yeah, it's the battery's Modbus. That's it.
Oh yeah, the inverter. So the inverter is more like the sort of stuff we would do with a proper bit of industrial equipment, more like a plant. And in fact, when I asked about this, the battery manufacturer was quite embarrassed about what the protocol looked like. He was like, "That's a mess." Because why would you not just want to be able to go ask this? Here's the answer. Ask this other tag name or address, rather than having like 5 different things, but all of them return everything, but in different bytes. And that you
It's.
then.
I was going to say that's not. It's not entirely unusual though, because So, for example, I've got these various sensors around the flat that it's just like simple sort of temperature, pressure, humidity, that kind of thing. They work by just every few seconds they send out a Bluetooth low energy advertisement, and so you can sort of passively just listen for them. And there's a whole thing about sort of bytes 1 to 6 or this, and you have to take bytes 7 and 8, and you have to do this you have to divide this bit by this bit to get this, and then this bit this. I don't think it's an entirely uncommon thing, but I think it's probably something that is more common in sort of consumer sort of equipment rather than industrial stuff with a proper protocol.
I agreed. And so, yeah, I forgot about it. But there's like, you've got to say, I'm going to talk to this battery. That's a command. And you finish that command. And then you send another command to say, and I want to read this. And then it replies with all of the stuff in a oneer. So this is the response, which is, okay, number of cells, cell voltage, blah, blah, blah. And then actually these addresses will change if the numbers of those is different, so on. And so it's a right nightmare. That's what that Python script is doing, is all of that, and then making it nice and neat as a tag name with a value, but in the shortest way possible. So data core should have, it started up, good. So in here there are script tags on the inverter. So if I go browse script tags, and there's control and current. So control being I want to discharge or I want to charge. Current being, if I'm charging, how quick do I want to charge? And these are things that I've got effectively App Store Connect looking at. There's 5 tags. I think that is all of them. I'm calculating 2 outputs. So total power in and total power out of the inverters, because there's 3 of them. So that then makes it nice and neat when you do a PNID that you've got a total of them. So if we take a look at the control, Graham will recognize some of this. But this is effectively going from 11:30 till 5:30. It was great to find a way to get the time zone, because it was it was a bit freaky around the time zone change. But now it does do that regardless of when the clocks change. It will go and put them on charge after 11 and switch them back, because you can attach solar panels to these inverters and it'll use that to charge the batteries and all that sort of stuff. Then the charge current, so this is the interesting one. So here it's doing a few different things. So it knows the on and off time as well, and it's deciding if it's when it's supposed to be discharging, it'll set it really low. So it'll say just do 3 amps of charging, which means it's not going to discharge the batteries if they're low and it happens to switch during the day, but it's not going to charge them much either, so it won't cost much money. Here it's figuring out from where I am in terms of the capacity of the batteries and the charge level, how much do I need to charge in terms of in ampere hours, and then how much time do I have left between now and the time that they would have to be charged, and then going, right, I need to charge this much. I've got 3 inverters, so I'm going to divide that by 3, and then going, right, I've figured out what my charge required is, but I want to know what the max charge is, and that's actually, so it's using the output power. So in order to not overload the cabling, I don't want to go over 20 kilowatts from the grid. So this is checking how much the house is pulling as well as how much the inverters will pull, and effectively making the inverters pull what's left if it's too much, to keep it under that amount. Because if it pulled too much, I'd blow the main fuse to the grid, and that would be like I'd phone the hydro board and they'd have to come out and replace that. So that's why it's creating a high limit based on what the house is using. So it'll do that all night, looking at if there's more being used or not. It's checking what the charge level is. So if we are below 80, it'll do like charge as fast as possible. And as we get closer and closer to charged, so you can see at 92, it's charging at 20 amps, and at 95, it's charging at 40, and at 99, it's going down to 3. So
why do you kind of gradually decrease it? Why not just...
Why not pull pelt?
I was going to say it's the same, presumably the same reason that your phone charges as fast as it can to 80% and then kind of does sort of trickle charging the closer it gets to 100.
Why does it do that?
If you imagine, so you don't really want to overcharge batteries. The way you charge them is by putting a voltage on them that's higher than the voltage of the battery.
Mm-hmm.
So if you charge really fast, you could potentially take them higher in voltage than they're supposed to be. At the end, at the start, it'll take it all. You could just throw loads of current at it and it'll just take it, and the voltage won't really move because it's still taking it. When there's not a lot of space, it might not be able to take it all. And if it can't take it all, the voltage will rise. And if that rises, it'll damage the battery. But towards the end, you want to taper it and just gradually take it to the end. And it also means you're more accurate, because as you bring down the amount of charge you're putting in, you're going to get a better reading of what the battery's got. So if you imagine like a car battery is 12 volts and you hook up a charger to it, you actually have to take the charger off and wait 12 hours before you put a probe on it to see how much charge it's got, because it's still got loads of resilient charging happening chemically in the battery. So it helps with that as well. So you want it to taper. You want to go fast to begin with and then slow when you're charging. That's what that does.
Just as a quick aside on the actual script, it doesn't really make any difference, but where you're declaring your time zone, your on time, your off time, and so on, because they're effectively constants, you can actually declare them before you do your return async blah blah blah, where you declare the function. So
can be out
here.
You
could actually declare them before that, so that they don't have to get. It's going to be negligible, but it means that it's not recalculating it every time it runs the script. It just recalculates it once on when it compiles the script.
That's quite handy, and especially for stuff that's going to run frequently, that'll be really useful. And you can see there's a funny rule for how often to run this. It's every 5 minutes. It's going to run it and try and do this stuff. So that's what controls the charging. It's IP-HIST that's doing the historization here. So you can look at the ambient temperature of the battery in data core as well. So if we go for a longer time period, you start to see that. And it's all relatively simple.
No, I was going to say this is unrelated to this thing, but just since you've got that alpha, just to show you, Steve, if you go to one of the other data sources you've got in there, say like the telemetry one, and just browse for tags, you see you've got a little database icon next to the tag.
I
the
pressed
tag
that.
names to now.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, so if you click on that, it gives you just a quick dialogue for configuring stuff to start recording at IP Historian. So
Yeah.
you get that on every data source that's not an IP Historian data source now.
And it's picked up all the
Makes it
ones
bit
you can
easier.
write.
I was going to say that's also not that relevant to what you've actually done. Is do you want to install an IP History 3 and have it mirror the same mappings to see if it works?
I was thinking about that, and we could clone this VM and put IP History 3 on it and have one running in V2 and one running on V3. Now it's on the network.
Would they not compete with each other for trying to?
Well, the Modbus one will work.
Yeah.
The battery one, undefined,
Oh.
will probably not work. But we could do the Modbus data source and we could compare that, which is a fair whack of tags. Equally, if you want to, if you're on the network, just configure a Modbus data source, Modbus TCP, that IP, and that port number, and I can give you the CSV Modbus map. I'll forward some of that stuff through to you, because that would be good, and then you could compare it with the one that's there, and we can check if the differences are, if there are differences, number one, and if whatever differences they are, if it's an improvement or a detriment. You can connect this machine on the network as well, so I'll send you the details of that, and then you can actually go and look at the config and make sure it's all the same.
That's the power curve of a battery. State of charge and charge rate.
Yes, so that would be, if you're talking about charging, are you going,
Twice scatter.
so we go 20 days, that should be about right. So bat all is all of them totaled up. So total state of charge, current.
This is going to be all of them.
So this has the current on charge and discharge. It's actually got that freaky bit, right? So let's miss that.
Well,
So you're going to get two parts, the curve and a discharge profile on the same thing.
let's just see what it looks like.
Yeah.
So there's the two curves, one at the top and one at the bottom. Swap them round.
So I think that's right. Now you'll find this is a bit weird because I don't think there's another system I'm aware of that's doing one thing I'm doing. It doesn't charge full pelt, and it doesn't charge as hard as it can. It charges knowing when the end time is. It will charge at 50%, 30% if the batteries are 30 or 50% capacity. It's very likely that these on the outside are when the batteries were heavily discharged.
Yeah.
These are where it was not heavily discharged. Yeah, because actually it wouldn't go through 100 or it wouldn't go through 0. So there's more here. So there's more here because I'm usually only discharging to about 40, 50.
iPhones do the same thing, but because they learn what time you get up if you charge your phone overnight. But they actually have a slightly different charging approach where they charge at full whack to 80%, and then they stop, and then they know what time you're going to wake up, and then they'll trickle charge so that when you wake up, your phone's full.
And that's a good balance for an unpredictable end time, because then if you got up early, you've still got 80%.
So there's no advantage in the middle bit of not going 100%. You might as well.
In
Is that what you're
the
saying?
middle bit of not going
Right, so say from discharge to 80%,
Mhm.
it's going at full pelt, you can do that in an hour.
Yeah,
And you look and go, well, actually, I've got 4 hours of electricity here, so I'll only do that at 25%. And I'll do it in 4 hours instead of 1 hour.
In terms of the phones, their optimization, so they've got lithium-ion batteries as opposed to lithium iron phosphate batteries. So lithium-ion batteries, if they're over 80%, they degrade like 5 to 10 times faster. So they're trying to minimize the amount of time that you're over 80%.
Yes. So
Yeah.
I'm okay with that bit.
Okay.
It's up to 80 is where I'm asking
Yeah.
the question. Does it matter
It
what
does.
rate you're doing it up to 80?
It does. If you do it
Because
slower,
The slower the better.
it's better. Yeah.
So you should be looking at how long you've got to do it and go with some kind of margin or whatever.
The question would be, because with phones you've got that, is someone doing night shift? Is there a reason that they've plugged it in? Are they actually going to pick it up after 20 minutes and expect it to have 20 minutes of charge? But you could imagine them going full pelt, connect to the Apple Watch. Are they sleeping? What time's their alarm set for? I think Google phones do what time's your alarm set for to decide. Yeah.
I think Mac has once been far smarter than I thought it would be with this, where I plugged it in and it was on like 50% or something, and it just went, I'm just not going to bother charging because I don't think you're going to unplug me. The thing the Mac has that the iPhone doesn't is no, you're wrong. Please charge anyway.
It's like, just do what I'm telling you to do.
Yeah.
To be fair, there's a different sort of expectation level as well, because if you're plugging in an actual laptop, it's not like I guess the thing with your phone is that you need it to have battery when you need to use your phone.
Yeah.
So there's probably more of an assumption about being more aggressive about charging.
The Mac's logic kind of makes sense. If you've plugged your Mac in at your desk because you're going to use it with your monitor and keyboard and mouse, it doesn't actually need to charge. It just needs to use the...
A couple of observations about this. You see this cluster here? It shows that quite a lot of the time for these batteries is around 92%, which is that whole once it's charged and then it sits there for about an hour.
Yeah.
For most of the rest of the time, it's a bit random because it might be there or it might be somewhere else. And the other one is, you see this current, this is in amps, and that's about 250 amps on 240 volts. The most you can pull out of a plug is 13.
Yeah.
So that's there. The cables for that need to be, at least about half a centimetre thick to be able to take that current. So you think about a 13 amp needing to be about half a centimetre thick, and then you think 260 amps, right? So like this is what scares an electrician when you start looking at these numbers. This is a lot of current. And the cables, they're like that.
Mm-hmm.
If you're pulling that sort of current, they will vibrate because of the magnetic field. They'll just do this, and you'll hear them go. This is loads and loads of power. But that's why it needed to be a lightning rod.
I think I've made that comment, like offshore, looking at some kind of panel, and it's like, you know what? But you can hear the electricity. I don't want to know about it.
And they say that, the electricians say it's volts that jolts, it's mils that kills.
Yeah.
And mils is milliamps.
Yeah.
So thousands of one of these is what kills in amps. You need the volts to be able to have
what I think you can see in the curve there is that really high amps are at the lower charge level.
Yes.
And there's another definite step change just below 90%. If you take your mouse along, the randomness changes there. Right?
Yeah,
So a
right.
bit to the right
Right here.
The it becomes much more predictable what it's doing at that point in time.
Yeah.
But your script had simpler logic for closer to the...
Yeah.
Correct.
And that's that.
Because it's
That's
now
what that
limited and bounded by
Yes.
a defined amount of current. You're absolutely
Yeah.
spot on. So this is an observation of the rules, where here it depends a lot on what the state of charge is and how much current the house is using.
Yeah.
Here it doesn't depend on what it is. So you're right. They're spot on.
But there is a curve, it's a bit random, but there is a curve of high
What are the
current.
outliers that are way below the curve there? In the...
What are these?
Yeah.
Do you know? Let's make a use of trend to find that out,
Yes,
because I have no
trend.
idea.
For a charge.
It's halfway up a charge. Let's zoom in.
There's a step.
Something happened here.
Which one switch again? Red one's the current.
Yeah, red one's the current, and that's the state charge. So it went to charge, but it didn't charge.
So have you been dicking about with it at that point in time?
It's probably what's happening. There'll be one day that I was doing something.
So that should have gone straight up to the top.
Now it does flick on, so it'll flick on to charge for a little while, but I don't think it's that long. At the low rate before it turns on and goes high. So it'll actually start charging, like 5 minutes before it'll go, right now, bring the current up.
Well, that's what that is then, isn't it?
Yeah, it might be. So maybe we just caught that in the sample. Yeah, it's about 5 minutes. It's actually
Okay,
3
so
amps.
it's a very short beat, which is why there's maybe not a lot of them. And it only happens once.
And one for each one. You're right.
Yeah.
So you get one sample in there
Yeah.
across 7 days. There'll be 7 of them. It look like it's just totally out of place. But it is that and a step and then right up. So there's normal charge there is about 140 amps. What's quite cool about this is it shows the current. So
what's yellow and blue?
so yellow is current and blue is temperature. So they're all about 10 degrees just now. And they're all going about 4.5 to 4.8, 3.4, 3.8, 3 to 5 amps coming out of them. And then, so you can see the differences in the state of charge. Each battery, when you do like that all, it's the average of these effectively. It'll be about the same number. But it's the overall charge state of the whole battery. But this one thinks it's higher than these, and this one thinks it's higher than these. In truth, I think these are the same. It's just that this battery doesn't know. So the voltage charge curve, this might have been what you were actually thinking about, for lithium iron phosphate is incredibly flat between about 5% and 95%. That means the voltage is the same between 5 and 95, and then it kinks at both ends. It goes really low fast at the low end and really high fast at the high end. That means between 5 and 95, you've got no idea where you are. And it's estimating by measuring how much goes out and measuring how much goes in. So it's not sure if it's offset from where it should be. But when I've charged these up, what tends to happen is you charge them up, and this one will charge to 100 and keep charging, and this one will charge to 100, and that's it finished. Because I reckon this one's overestimated its actual charge state.
It doesn't reset.
Yeah, it doesn't reset.
It does when you charge it to 100,
Right.
which I'm not doing often.
What's your efficiency taking power from this mains?
I've once worked that out. I should have found that spreadsheet. But
I've heard you quote it somewhere.
yeah,
It was quite high, wasn't it?
it was quite high. It was between 95 and 100.
I wouldn't have thought
It was
near that.
more efficient than I expected it to be. There will be inaccuracies in there, but it was higher than I expected. I expected 80.
So it'd be interesting to go back and do a schematic,
Of we would things you actually worry about.
a nice little exercise. Probably it wouldn't have been appropriate to do that in the beginning because you didn't really know what's interesting and what you're looking at.
Yeah, until you've got it and you've worked with it for a while.
Now that you do,
If there's 4 cell voltages, there's an ambient temperature and a temperature of the circuit board in these batteries. If any of the cell temperatures go below 0, they will refuse to let you charge them. They will just go no. And they'll do that because if you charge these batteries below 0 degrees, they will never charge again. They just suck all the lithium and it plates on the electrodes and that's it, done. And I'm surprised, but I think that all of the battery control systems I've seen have a tight limit on 0. So if it's 0.1, they will charge, and if it's 0, they will not charge. So it's like, wow, it's a bit close, yeah. And so it's a battery that's that size, and there are 4 sensors. I don't know where they are. I asked them where they were, but I never got an answer. But you can imagine that maybe part of the battery is below 0 and part of it's above 0. What happens?
Is 0 actually the temperature, or is 0 got a bit of wiggle?
bit of function there.
That's a good question. Maybe they tell people 0, but it's actually
Yeah.
-1 or -3 or
It
something.
would be a hell of a coincidence if it happened to be the freezing point of water.
Yeah,
I mean, there's no water in it.
it's a graph.
Close to -30.
Yeah, 0, it's...
10 amp charge current.
Oh, the guy's made these numbers up. There's a disclaimer at the bottom.
So he's saying you can still charge, but so C rate is number of amps per amp per hour. So it's per hour that you can charge the battery at. So with 60 kilowatt hours, it works out at 200 times 6. It's 1,200 ampere hour battery. So that would mean for a C rate of 1, I'd be charging it at 1,200 amps. So I'm tending to charge these at a very low C rate.
Yeah.
Because it tends to be 5 hours, because that's how long I've got, cheap, or 6 hours of electricity. So it's 1 divided by 6, like 0.1. So my C rate's about here. So according to that, I'd be okay to charge to -25, but that is a general rule. But I've not heard anyone say that it was okay to do that in any way. Oh, possible is not the same as wise. Here we go. So, and this does go into the, if you charge at a lower rate, it's safer as well, but more in a magnified way at low temperatures. So, so I've got a shortcut on my phone screen that just goes pull that up, and that's how I know if something's going wrong. It looks like it's not managed to pull the grid voltage and that voltage for some reason, but it's got the other ones. It might be the Wi-Fi to that thing. It's cut out.
Right, so that's real time. Oh, you can get that from a historian.
Yeah, that's real time. That's right now. There you go.
For a project. And how did you get on with all our software doing this?
I think probably a good way to describe that is the reaction of the guy that supplied the batteries when I got the protocol and got the detail of how to do stuff, and then 2 days later I showed him trends of everything, and he was like, "What the hell are you doing? How are you doing this?" And no part of it took a large amount of time. There are some things that are general background tasks. It's not our software, it's the getting the right Modbus address for the right thing.
That's fundamentally the thing with every Modbus project, is because ultimately somewhere you need to get some document that tells you what all the addresses are, and then you need to work out what
What they
aspects
actually
of that, what aspects of that document are wrong.
And how they cheated with the number as well, because it's usually not the right number. It's just like an integer or something, and you've got to do something with it.
Oh yeah, or it'll be that the document says that it's in this unit, but it actually turns out that they're emitting it in some completely different unit that isn't documented, and you have to work out what that is. And
That's about a month. It's going to go bigger, but this is the electricity demand at the house. One of the coolest things with plot, you can see all the ups and downs, but that's the most I've pulled since September is 13.9 kilowatts. So I went close to the 15 maximum. You can go over it. It'll let you go over it for a small period of time, and then it'll go into safety mode and just go. Yeah, but I've never managed. I've never done it. You can see the point that I changed or switched off the backup server. Look at the minimum amount of power dropping.
It's about a third of your base load.
Which is less than I thought it was. I thought it was the majority of my base load. So it's shown me that actually there's a bunch of other stuff that's
Fridge.
yeah,
Fridges.
fridge, all the routers, the skyboxes, they're quite warm.
Very good.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
nice one.